This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Atom Audio, Isotope, JZ Microphones, and Solid State Logic. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ V12 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100D mic pre and C610 complementer with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. So please remember to check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. And now, get ready to rock.
Anytime I work on something of Frank's that I used to listen to on the bedroom floor is what really gets me off. It takes me back to being a kid listening to my brother's records. And now I'm working on the actual piece that I used to listen to 40 odd years ago on the floor as a kid. Now I'm mixing it. I know when it's right is when I'm reliving old moments, in other words.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record up to 2 terabytes over USB-C with speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second, transfer your tracks in a flash, and take your samples and sessions with you to the studio or stage. The OWC Envoy Pro Electron is your waterproof, dustproof, and crush-proof SSD that you can rely on. Use our custom link in the show notes to help support this podcast at macsales.com/rockstars. If you've ever wondered how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars, it's because I've been cheating by using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing on my voice RX breath control, D-click, D-clip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Check out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Hey Rockstars, it's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Craig Parker Adams, a repeat guest on the podcast. Last time he was here, he was on episode 331. Craig is owner of Winslow Ct Studio in Los Angeles and an accomplished guitarist and producer. Last time he was on the show, we got to hear about his background in music and talked about running Winslow Ct, which is the oldest recording studio in the world, dating back to the 1900s, where it was creating Foley and sound for the very earliest of film productions when the talkies were first arriving. Craig has also worked with an incredible list of artists, actors, world healers, all kinds of interesting folks there at his studio, but it also includes working with Frank Zappa. And he recently got a great write-up in Rolling Stone about mixing Frank Zappa and the Mothers' epic 1971 Fillmore East Shows for the 50th anniversary Reissue 8 CD box set, which includes band encores with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and even a recording of the infamous London's Rainbow Bridge gig that left Zappa nearly paralyzed when a crazed fan jumped on stage and pushed him off the edge of the stage into the orchestra pit, which I remember reading about in Frank's autobiography. So very, very cool stuff. Please welcome back Craig Parker Adams to Recording Studio Rockstars. Craig, are you ready to rock again, dude?
Yes, I am ready to rock. Let's rock.
Awesome, man. Welcome back to the show, man. It's fun to have you here again. It was really, really cool to just hear you go on about all the stories there at your studio. I mean, I think I recall you were even telling us about, stories of hauntings and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, it was a wild ride there. There was many things occurred, and it was always interesting and exciting, and so tons of things to recollect upon and to share. So it was just at this point, it's all gratitude. Looking back, it's like, wow, it's quite
Yeah.
a ride.
Now I said Winslow Court is in LA, but as soon as I said that, I thought, is that accurate or is that the best way to describe it? Tell us
No,
again where you are.
Yeah, so Los Angeles is definitely accurate. The studio that we're talking about, that all of that history was at, is I haven't been in that studio now for 2.5 years. I was there for 22 years, from '97 up until 2019, when the whole complex was just evicted. There was like 18 studios, people doing business out of there. I had the original studio, the Foley studio.
Yeah.
And so they just booted everybody out of there. So I fortunately, because of who you just mentioned, like the Zappas in particular, I'm still in Los Angeles. I still have Winslow Court, and I'm just located now more in central LA, closer to the beach, basically, as opposed to the heart of Hollywood.
Right on, right on. And so you've been up to a lot of cool stuff. So Rockstars, one of the things we talked about on the last episode were these incredible, Eddie Van Halen-esque guitar tones that Craig's so good at getting for his own music as well. So I highly recommend you go listen to that. But I think you've recently released a new album as well, or you're about to, right?
I am about to, yeah.
And when this comes out too, it'll be out by the time this episode comes out.
Right. Yeah, this is one of those, like, what I would consider my lifetime project, and working on it, over the years when I felt I didn't have like the residual vibe from a client's work on me, and so and it all relates to kind of the Ed type of guitar playing, which is just a sliver of what I do as a musician. But anyways, it's super exciting for me to finally kind of have this done. It's already been mastered. I'm now in I'm in the aspects of basically getting the vinyl and all of the particulars that go along with releasing a record. So it's basically done and dusted, and I'm super stoked about, and I can't wait to get it out. So that's what's going on with that.
Right on, done and dusted. Well, let's dive into some of the particulars, because that's one of the nice things about this podcast is, there's stuff that we all want to learn about that. I know I am gearing up to release my own record for the first time. And I, all the aspects of marketing it and getting it out there will all be brand new to me, as they are to many of our guests, or many of our listeners rather. Mm-hmm. Let's back up a little bit. So talk a little bit about the writing process for this record. How did you go from no songs at all to a collection of songs that made you think, okay, this is an album for me?
Well, that's a big question, and I'll tell you why. Because see, the thing about this record is it's actually as I was kind of saying, it's a life's journey. It was originally the concept for it was originated really back in 1981 when I was a 12-year-old kid. But now jumping ahead all these years till around 2010 or so, which is when I was putting together this group, 2011. I got put together a band, and because I had worked with so many really good bands and great session players and whatnot, when I found the two other guys, right away I could tell, we had something special, but I could also tell that they weren't really into putting in the time that it takes to get a band to sound like a killer, rock and band, because of everybody's life situation and whatnot. And because of that, I kind of knew like, oh, this is something I'm going to have to do myself. But I love their energy and what they bring to it. So basically, I kind of put together the outline of song ideas, and did some recording. This is back in 2011 and 12. And because I knew I had to get it while the burner was hot, so to speak. And I knew that I was going to have to finesse these into completed songs later down the line when I had the energy to do it and make us sound like a great band. So
give yourself the freedom to be in that initial sketching frame of mind So you don't
For
lose the idea, right?
Exactly, because I had been looking for musicians and players for so long, and when we played, I knew the second we played, I was like, oh, we have a sound, so that is valuable. But then, like I say, when I also knew that, well, to get a rhythm section to sound like they've been, like they're at their top, they either need to be basically, you know, what they call an A-list, kind of rhythm section that people hire to play on records, or two guys that have been playing in a band and are out on tour and they're working it so they get the synergy happening. And uh, because of where everybody was located, and just the kind of grumblings of like, oh, traffic and it's hard to get here and all this and that, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, these guys aren't going to put in what I need to put in to get us to sound like a seasoned band, but yet we got a sound. So that was where I started putting this together. And even at that time, I wasn't thinking like, oh, this is my life's purpose. This is all part of this thing that happened to me all these years ago, and now it's coming to fruition. I didn't see that then. So I started working on the songs. And for me, I decided, it's like I'm one of these guys that's kind of cerebral. So if for me to let go when I play, it's like everything's got to be together, and I was
Right.
plagued. One of the things that led me to being a studio rock star was being in bands that just didn't get it together in the 90s, where there was always some guy who was a hired player for the gig or whatever. And so you're always having to be on alert to make sure that they're catching cues and all this and that.
Yeah.
And I could never just let go and really get in the zone and get lost at the gig. So I didn't want to do a record that was kind of subpar, in my opinion. It's like, this has to matter to me. Like, I want every note to mean something to me, or there's no point in me doing it. I don't need to clutter up the musical world. That's how I felt. It's like, I want to say something.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of writing the notes and everything, to get to your original question about, how did these come together? It really was a cathartic experience, which is where I was going through. It's literally, when I hear this record now, because it's completely done, it's every note is some memory from my childhood or something. It's like it runs a film in my head. So it was not easy to get the notes that ended up becoming the songs that completed this record, because it all dealt with some form of healing or some form of some cathartic type thing. So I ended up kind of reliving and summoning all these old memories and things that I forgot about. And the thing that was tough about it is I was, in the last 10 years, I've been working so much on other people's stuff, as well as having, I'm at that age where, I had all these family issues with my parents' health and things like that, and my in-laws and whatever. So there's all this life stuff going on, and it's like, I can't work and get the purity of the notes with all this chaos.
Right. I know that feeling. It's like it's wonderful to work on everybody else's records, but it also can feel like a distraction from focusing all of our energy on the thing that we want to create that's our own. And yet at the same time, sometimes working on everybody else's record gives you these light bulbs of inspiration.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was always like, I'm doing this other project for a reason, and working with this artist is going to bring some sort of something that I will be able to utilize. There's a lesson, or there's a message, or there's something in it. So that's how I was able to psychologically deal with it, going, I'm not wasting my time doing this other stuff. I'm learning something that I can utilize for what I'm trying to do for this project for myself.
Yeah. And now, so your record is instrumental, or are you also writing lyrics and singing on the new one?
It is. I do a little bit of that sort of stuff, but not on this record. This is just a 3-piece instrumental record. It's really, the whole kind of, if you were to really sum it up, it's like, I didn't reinvent the wheel. It's very basic, but I was trying to get weight behind every single note.
Yeah.
So it's really, it was a life's lesson in simplicity and purity. And what I mean by the purity is that you really are getting the deep emotion of me and that's why my name's on it. I mean, every note has been synthesized and gone through some life's experience and been turned into a musical note. So I like to refer to it as a single malt, and that's why it takes so long for me to do it. Like my good friend Kyle, last time I saw him, told me, he's like, "Hey man, you were supposed to do this when we were in our 20s, you know?"
Yeah,
And it's like, he's right, I was, but I wasn't in that spot or that place to be able to do it.
Well, you're not alone, dude. There are so many of us rock stars out there who, as we are older, in our older age, we look back on those projects that we started, we didn't finish them, or we still would like to finish them. There's so many of us that have, a hard drive full of songs that are still sitting there that we love, and we think it'd be great to get them out there.
Yes.
I know that for me, actually, by the time this comes out, my record should be out now too. So Skadoosh, my instrumental record, is similar to yours, where it wasn't even a trio. It was just myself and the drummer, and then I sort of built everything else. Well, I didn't sort of. I did build everything else up around it.
Beautiful.
But I know that feeling of wanting to make sure that it all makes sense. It all adds up, like from start to finish. Every moment in the song takes you somewhere, and the head feels like there's a reason to be there.
Right. And then also too, because you're a being of integrity, it's like you've learned so much from all the people you've worked with. So you can't cut corners. You can't authentically do less than the best that you've worked on.
I know, it kind of sucks sometimes, doesn't it? Right? Because I remember the very first thing we ever recorded, I didn't know anything. So my only job was to just be super excited about what we just did, and it was a blast.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you want it to give you all of these things, in terms of that enjoyment and that, just wild abandonment and all of that sort of stuff, and the whole spirit of why you even do music to begin with. But then when you measure that up against, well, I've made all these records with all these wonderful people, and I know that, A, B, or C is not where it should be. And, for this thing, for me, it's like I just told a mastering engineer, I was going to master it myself, but I was just so deep into it at a point where I was just like, at this point now I got to give it away. And I had Steve Markison, who's just this, over 40 years in the business. If you looked up his resume, there's like 3,000 titles there that probably 80% of, throughout your life, just the hugest records, the biggest bands, whatever.
Right on.
And so for me to finish up with somebody like him, and he just took care of me in the deepest way. But you have to do the best that you think. And as I was telling him, it's like this whole project has been leading me by my nose. It's like it talks to me and tells me what to do. I'm not running down the field with the ball going, here's here. I mean, even though I'm in charge of it, at the esoteric level, it's leading me. And so if something's not right, I don't care how many times you have to do it. And this isn't that, the person who's obsessed where they're killing it to death. It's not you're over trying to fix it or any of that. It's more so, no, I know I can sense it's supposed to be like this, and I'm going to keep going until I get that. And it will tell me when I'm there,
Nice. Well, tell us a little bit about your studio setup now, so that we can learn a little bit more about, what were some of the tools and the methods that you used to finish out your record. Were you recording a bunch of final overdubs near the end, or has this mostly been a mixing process for you recently?
It's mostly been a mixing process. The majority of the recording, at least in terms of the drums and the bass, that was cut really, in 2012, late 2011, 2012. That's when I had, I cut like a dozen tunes for this thing. And like I say, they were mostly ballpark in terms of the tempos and the arrangements and whatnot. I had my parts were just enough to get the track cut, with the band, and I knew, like, I'm going to refine my parts, everybody, just so everybody knows this. And what's crazy is it's literally been a decade, and the guys who played on it, they just came and heard it for the first time a month ago when I got the mastering back.
Wow.
And if you can imagine, it's like meeting somebody in 1970 and doing some recording, and then it's like, okay, I'll see you in 1981. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, what is that? That's insane. But that's the reality of it. And those two guys were totally cool the whole time. They're like, we trust you. We know you got this. It's coming. I felt like the guy who cried wolf, like, no, I'm working on it. It's getting done. It's getting done,
Yeah.
But so the majority of it was cut there at the Winslow Court in Hollywood. And with my rig, which we talked about last time. And here at my new location, it was mostly just the fine tuning of the feels and whatnot. And I did end up recording. There was a song that I wanted to do at the very end for a guy. There's a tribute to somebody who passed away, who was kind of this guy who I considered to be the best Ed. I call him Ed Heads, the best Ed guy who could nail the sound of the Van Halen 1 and Women and Children First vibe. Like, this guy was just incredible, like the best I've heard at that. And I kind of specialize more in the Van Halen 2 Fair Warning vibe, which is a different feel. It's a different vibe for those people who know Ed's cool. Playing at that level. But what's crazy is that this guy he was not only an incredible guitar player, but he was also an amp builder. And to find a guy who can build amps, who's also a player, I've just never seen that. And so he ended up, I have a 1969 Marshall and it's a Super Bass 100. And I sent it to him in Texas. He had it for like 8 months, and he did a mod on my amp. We became friends online, so I never met him in person. But anyways, he modded my Marshall for me and sent it back. And he was kind of a big inspiration for me getting my record done and whatnot. But sadly, he passed away before it was done. And so I felt like he kind of got robbed. He died in his mid 40s, and I didn't see it coming. And I just felt terrible about that. And I knew I wanted to tribute him, but I didn't have the energy to take on writing that song while I have to synthesize all this other childhood stuff to finish my other tunes. So that was the last thing that I recorded for this record. And I did that here at my new location. And get this, I got to write his song and record his song. Even though I had the drums, I played the bass on that song. So there's a bass player on the record on everything else, but I played bass on this song because I'm in this new location, and I just didn't want to have the guy come in and learn a new tune. I just wanted to get the record done at this point. But I got to use the same guitar that Edward used on Women and Children First, which is
wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's the guitar that his friend Chris Holmes from Wasp used to lend to Ed in the studio. And if you know, Ed has this on the cover of that record. He has this guitar that he's known for. They call it the Shark guitar, which is a Ibanez Destroyer that Ed sawed into with a chainsaw, and he turned it into this famous striped shark-looking guitar.
Right.
But when he did that, he ruined the sound of it. So he wouldn't record with it anymore. He just used it on encores in the live show. So when he was in the studio, his friend Chris had the twin of that original guitar before Ed carved his up. Chris Holmes from Wasp is the guy who bought the first Ibanez that came in 75. And there was two of them. They went to a store in Pasadena. And when he bought his, he told Ed, hey, you got to go buy this guitar because there's one left. And so Ed bought the sister. So my amp guy, Doug Anderson, he has a thing called the Van Halen Museum. He owns that guitar. He bought it from Chris back in the 80s when Chris was on a binge or something and needed money. He sold it to my amp guy. Wow. So he has it on display in the Van Halen Museum. Well, I forgot all about that. I wasn't thinking about that at all. Well, when my amp guy came to see me a year ago in my new location, he's like, what's taking so long with your record, man? Get this thing done. And I was trying to explain to him all of the nuances of what was happening and why it was taking so long. And he offered to me he's like, hey, how would you like to use the Chris Holmes guitar for this final song for this tribute for this guy? And I was like, are you kidding? So he brought it over to me, and I had it here for about 2 months. And this song it's I got to finish off my record using a guitar that Ed used on that record. So, and in tribute to, like I said, my favorite Ed head. So that was recorded here at my new location. In my new location, I do not track live bands at. I have a big overdub room. So, my overdub room is set up with my Hammond and my piano and my Whirly and, a bunch of amps and things. And I'm doing violin sessions or vocal sessions or organ sessions or any, percussion, anything that you want to do after the fact. And then I have a really nice mixed mastering room. So even though I master records for others, I did not do the mastering on mine. I just wanted.
I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to team up with a mastering engineer to do mine too, even though I have mastered it myself before.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to do it. I'm excited for it. Can you talk a little bit about how you recorded, how did you set up that guitar and record yourself on this? And if you feel like it's too much of a repeat of the same thing from last time, say so. But if there was anything about how you set it up and recorded yourself in your new space, would love to hear that.
Well, it was a little different. This song is this final song. The fella's name that I'm referring to, his name is Mark Abrahamian. And so the song that I wrote is called M.A. the Badass, because this guy was a badass. And so this is probably one of the more aggressive tunes on the record. But also, too, I don't do a lot of big solos and stuff. I'm not so much a solo shredder kind of guy, but there are solos. But this song has a big kind of fade out solo on it. And when I play it, I imagine me playing with him, on stage. And basically, it's a tribute to everybody who's kind of striving, to any players out there that are still striving. That's what this is all about. And I felt like he didn't reach his full potential, even though he blew me away. And I thought, wow, this guy's great. I still saw him as a rising talent. Anyways,
right
how I recorded it was, like I said, I got to use the Ibanez Destroyer. And what I did was I used 3 heads and 2 cabinets. I slaved 2 of the heads through. I used two of my heads are used basically as power amps, and then I use a preamp head. The preamp head is a Steve Vai Legacy head. The Marshall goes on one side, and I use this Carvin cabinet, a Carvin head, which I've had since the late 80s, on another side. And then I have my pedal board gets split through it, which is basically, an MXR Phase 90 and the MXR flanger, the originals from back the early 70s.
Right.
And then I also use a Echoplex, a 60s Echoplex, an EP2 on one side. So there's a slap back comes out of one cabinet, which is wet. And then I split the signal through this thing called a PDS 1002, which is a Digitech delay pedal, which has a wet out and a dry out. And I end up with a bigger sounding delay on one cabinet and a dry out to the other. So the slap cabinet stays dry, and I can turn on and off this bigger delay sound.
The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia, featuring the patented Golden Drop capsule design for enhanced clarity that will give your recordings that classic vintage tone. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ V12 mic. Our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer only available to Recording Studio Rockstars listeners, so use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the V67, V47, and V12 microphones. Go to jzmic.com and get your vintage mic now. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One Reaper, or whatever you're using. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Do you find that you tend to pan the dry cabinet to one side of your mix or the other?
Yes, yeah. And so the way it sits,
which side?
So the dryer sound, it's as if you're on stage. So if as a listener, if you're looking at the speakers, the dryer side is going to be on your left. The slapback is, I run it about 2 o'clock, somewhere over there. And
I do that too. I think it's because we read English that goes from left to right. I wonder why it is that I always tend to like pan something, start with the left and then go to the right whenever I'm panning things out. It's funny.
Yeah. And this is the only, Dweezil, my good friend Dweezil, he wanted me to use this thing that he uses when he goes on tour, and it's called a fractal. And he stopped touring when the touring started getting super expensive, like around maybe 2010 or 2009, 2010, when he was out doing his Zappa Plays Zappa and all that stuff, he basically downsized from taking out, the refrigerator rack and the cabs and all of that and the heads and whatnot. He streamlined it down to this thing called a fractal, which is basically a 2-space, rack-mounted deal that's fully programmable, but it uses algorithms where you get really authentic tones out of this thing. And nice. It's like designed by some NASA guy, ex-NASA guy, and Dweezil was doing a lot of R&D for that guy. So he started using this thing. Well, anyways, when I started working on my record, he's like, oh man, he's like, you got to use your fractal and stuff. And I'm thinking, but dude, I got a 69 Marshall. Why do I want to use that? But it's Dweezil. He knows what he's talking about. So I'm like, well, I got to use my rig because I sent it to this guy in Texas and I want to use it. I like my rig. I want to use it. But at the same time, I also want to appease him because he's an incredible talent and he knows what he's talking about. So 90% of my record is my rig, which basically goes from hard left till about 2 o'clock, which is where the slapback lives over there. And then from 2 o'clock over to hard right is this thing called a fractal. And so when I was recording, I was using all of this at the same time through this guitar splitter box that Dweezil had lent to me. And it gives you this big, rich, full sound. It's just one guitar, but it's taking up the whole entire spectrum. And it's basically my rig and this unit of his. Well, I'm not using that unit of his, although he did give me that unit. I am not using it on this final tune. So this final tune is just that Marshall and the other 2 amps that I just mentioned.
Right on. So the fractal is basically a digital modeling amp that gives you it looks like it gives you pretty in-depth modeling stuff and accompanying foot pedals for easy switching and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, there's no foot pedals it probably has that it comes with, but he didn't give me that. He just gave me the box. So yeah. It's the rack mount piece. And also too, I didn't go scrolling through it. Dweezil already created a tone on it that he calls, brown sound. Mm-hmm. So I didn't even go fishing through the thing. I was just like, okay, there it is. And I just went with it. Like, see, that's one thing about this record is like, last time we talked about these kind of Van Halen demos things that I did. And the whole purpose of that was kind of to chase Ed. But the whole purpose of this record was not to chase Ed. It's the complete opposite. Now, in 2010, we didn't talk about this. In 2010, what we did talk about is how I ended up working on Frank's catalog. If you remember, I'll just reiterate a little bit for those who may not have heard. In 2010, Dweezil had he was doing mixing all of these live concerts that were there were Zappa Plays Zappa concerts, and they were to fulfill contracts where people bought packages where they would get a download of the show that they went to. Okay,
Right.
and his engineer that he had working on it at the time, some I can't recall what it was, but the guy wasn't able to complete the gig. And Dweezil was going through some varying hard. There was just a lot on his plate at that time, and so I offered to him, "Hey, if you need me to help in any way, just let me know." And he ended up calling me a couple weeks later and saying, "You know what? I really could use your help. Would you mind?" And so I started mixing these Zappa Plays Zappa concerts for him up in the UMRK up at Frank's studio at the house.
Wait, UMRK, that's not Utility Muffin Kitchen?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Research Kitchen. Yep.
Yes, that's great. I love it.
Yeah. So I'm working in there, working on that thing. I called it the Rupert, but it's I think a Neve 5088, whatever it was. And I'm working on Dweezil's setup, which was a PC on Nuendo. And I work on a Mac.
That's awesome.
Doing Pro Tools.
I love how old school you guys are, that you're rocking a Pro Tools 10 on a Mac and Dweezil's. I mean, it's just a reminder that well, it's a reminder of this wonderful combination, intersection of like brand new things like this fractal system with an older version of something that just still works great in the studio. It's like when you figure out how to get a sound, a lot of times in our studios, we feel like, why do I need to change it? Why do I need to hit the upgrade button? Why do I need to do this or that? But really, it's the great combination of all those things that adds up so nicely.
Yep. Yeah. You got to be open to it and see if there's a way that you can parlay it into what you're doing, make it work. And so I'm up there helping him out. And within 2 weeks of when I'm up there, and just as I said before about how quickly I was up there, and Gail, his mom, came in and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm helping Dweezil." And she's like, "Oh, I didn't know you did that," because she didn't know about my studio. She knew I was his friend, of course, but she just didn't know what I was doing in my daytime, whatever. And so that's when she asked me to do something at Frank's. But in that same time frame, when I'm up there, I end up having a meeting with Eddie Van Halen.
Wow.
Now, how did this happen? Well, I and another friend of mine, this guy named Mike Wolf, who I had just met at the time, who's another studio owner and a guitar player. And I was working with Dweezil, and Ed called Dweezil, and he was trying to get a hold of some old recordings of the band because they were trying to find and write music for the record that ended up becoming the record called A Different Kind of Truth. And so I'm sitting there with Dweezil when he's on the phone with Ed. And when he got off the phone, I was, Dweezil and I we're collectors. We absorb anything that Ed did throughout his life. Like we're into it. We want to hear it,
Yeah.
And so is this other guy, that guy Mike, who I had recently met. And so we basically, I brought Mike into the equation because Mike has a great collection of some very old stuff from the neighborhood, we'll say. And so we put together, we called Ed back and put together a meeting over at Dweezil's and Frank's control room. And literally within a few days, it's funny because the guy who I met, Mike, the studio referral service had sent him to me. And so he came in with some clients, and he saw Ed on my wall. This is at the Hollywood studio, and we start talking, and I start telling him about those demos I recorded. And so it starts this whole conversation, and he's like, "Oh man, I got some old Ed recordings and whatnot." And so we had a listening party, him and I, and then this just happened where now Ed calls looking for stuff. And I tell Dweezil, it's like, "Dude, we got the stuff," he's because, Ed's looking, because Ed never collected his older, like he kept things he was working on, but he didn't keep bootlegs of the band or any of this kind of stuff.
Right.
So, so I tell Dweezil about this guy, Mike, that I met. And so, he said, "Well, call him up and let's try and get a meeting together." And so I called him, and it's like, Mike's very protective of, he these aren't people who give out copies and stuff. We're not
Right.
bootleggers or anything. It's like
Right.
they're more like protectors of the realm, or however you want to look at it. And I called him, and imagine I just met him, like 2 weeks before that or whatever, for the first time. And I call him and I say, hey, Mike, if you were to give any of your copies of any of your recordings to anybody on the planet, who would that be? Like, who would you deem worthy enough? And he's like, I don't know. He's thinking about it. And I said, what are you doing Thursday? And he's like, why? And I go, how would you like to have a meeting with Ed? And he's just like, what? Because he had never met him. So anyways, now, a couple of days later, here we are. We're having a meeting with Ed. I said, put together 10 CDs of the best unreleased VH that you have, because Ed's looking for material. So Mike put together his best collection. I put together my best collection, and Dweezil set up the meeting with Ed, and we did it at Frank's. And
that's wild, man. That's great.
So, yeah. Now there's a reason why I'm telling you the story. So here we are now. We're in this now. It's just the four of us. So and this is the first time. Like, I had met Ed before throughout my life, but now it's just a really private setting with just four people, me and three others. So it's a very focused meeting, and we're there for like 2.5 hours. We're listening to all of this old Van Halen stuff with him, and it was incredible. And what happened is I'm basically sitting, across from Ed, and he's talking to me, and I'm not hearing a word he's saying. I'm looking into his eyes, and this inner dialogue starts going on in my head. And it says, Craig, it's time you get off this guy's back. Get off of his shoulders. Leave him alone. Let him be. You need to carve your voice.
Yeah.
Stop chasing him, because it was 35 years basically, or 30 plus years at that time, of me trying to figure out what is the magic that this guy is exuding? Where is this coming from? How does he do it? And so
it's all in the feet, man. It's all in the feet. Did you get a chance to tell him that it was in the feet?
Yeah. That was at our next meeting, where he and I were by ourselves for 2.5 hours. That was what I had mentioned to you before.
Right.
And then that sparked a friendship, where he initiated a friendship with me, where he's like, hey man, you got to stay in touch. I really had a great time. And then that led to phone calls and other type things of him giving me advice, and him being the first person to hear my record. He just wanted to hear my record mixed. He's like, he goes, I'll come in here, Craig, but I just want to hear it mixed. That's all I ask. It has to be mixed.
Nice.
So, but anyways, so I left that meeting and I put down my guitar. I didn't touch it for over a year.
Heavy.
Yeah. I was just like, I need to reevaluate what I'm doing. And before I ever heard of Edward Van Halen, I was playing more of like Les Pauls. And once I learned about Ed, I switched to Strats, and then, just tried to do everything like he did. So that time off, and then me finding the Les Paul, my whole record is made with one guitar, and it's a 68 Les Paul reissue from 2000, other than the guitar from Women and Children First. But so that, I took a year off, and I tried to get my calluses to go away, and I just, all this stuff, I wanted to unlearn stuff. And then my plan was, and also too, this whole talk that you and I are having right now, him and I had this talk as well. I was like, I wanted to relearn my touch. So I wanted my calluses to change, and I wanted them to reform on a Les Paul neck with really heavy strings, as opposed to a Strat with really thin strings.
Wow.
So I changed my whole approach to how I played. I got a different guitar, and and this was all about rekindling what it was when I was a little kid, of why I started playing guitar to begin with in the first place.
Well, I think that's interesting, because I mean, I know I go through that, and I think we all do. We bump up against and struggle with that thing that we do all the time with our instrument or in the studio, where we're like, man, I just feel like I'm I'm just repeating myself. I pick up a guitar and I'm like, I want to play a chord, and I play an open A or an open D or something. I'm like, I don't want to hear that again. Come on, do something new, Lidge. So I know what that feeling is to you. It's amazing that we can create professional mixes using a computer in our home studios. But trying to mix with a mouse, it's like trying to play the guitar with the tip of a pencil. It sucks. And why shouldn't you be able to mix as naturally as you play the guitar? That's why I upgraded my studio to include the SSL UF8 fader pack and UC1 channel strip controllers. They let me mix as fast as I can feel the music. Go put the fun back into your mixes at solidstatelogic.com. Adam Audio introduces the all-new A7V monitor with rotatable HPS waveguide for the accelerated ribbon tweeter and advanced onboard DSP-based room correction using the included A-Control software or optional SonarWorks software with a measurement mic, allowing you to tune your speakers for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at adamaudio.com. This is all awesome, man. I'd love to hear a little bit too about the mixing process for you of finishing. Well, the Eddie story might be about finishing the previous record, not the newest one.
No, it is.
It is about the newest one. Okay. Well,
yeah, because that's what it. I call the record Vestibule. Vestibule is a term that I made up, and I didn't really know. Basically, I was trying to come up with a cool name for a band that I liked. That was a mixture of cool bands that I liked when I was a little kid, and so that's the term I came up with. Well, basically, I didn't know it at the time, but that is what I call my compelled journey. So that's the name of my record, is Vestibule. Okay. And that's what that term means. Now, that compelled journey started with Ed in my childhood bedroom when I heard a piece of music that took my heart right out of my body, and I started, I had this otherworldly experience. Well, now I wasn't living my life consciously thinking I'm on this journey to complete this thing that happened way back in 1981. No, I'm now in a meeting with Ed, and it's being confronted to me. And it was only after that meeting where I put the guitar down, I took time off, and I regressed my playing kind of the best of where I was at the time, but I was trying to start it back from my early youth, where I started remembering, oh yeah, I had that experience, and it's all coming together, and it led, my life's journey led me to the guy who initiated it, which was Ed, and now here I am at Ed and with Ed, and I'm thinking, I got to leave him alone and now bring my voice out and put my journey to the test. Did I do what I declared I was going to do when I was 12 years old? Find out how to do what this piece of music is doing to me. And when I met those guys and started playing with them, I wasn't thinking that yet. I wasn't thinking like, I have to fulfill my journey. That still wasn't solidified in my mind. It was only after we started playing, and I was like, I'm going to have to do this myself. These guys are not going to put in the time. Then it all started to come to the surface like, oh, this is all part of my whole life's job. I can see it. You know what I mean? And then, so and then to have Ed there in 2014, and him and I sharing this, me telling him all of this, and then him saying to me, I want to hear it. It was like, this is incredible. Like now I can fully see what's going on here. So
tell us how you mixed it. So, he gave you the gauntlet has been thrown down.
Yeah.
Mix this thing before you play it to me. What did you do to mix it? Did you mix it on your Pro Tools 10 rig? Were there any special ways that allowed you to get to the finish line? And then, of course, I want to continue this conversation in the back half of the show, talking about how you applied this stuff to the Zappa 8 CD set as well. But talk about some of your mixing techniques to get this stuff to sound right to you.
Okay, well, basically everything was done, in the box. Other than I have the ability to send things out through my analog setup. So when recording, I'm using the Universal Audio LA610s. Those were going on one of my cabinets. I used two of those with two different 57s on one 412.
Okay.
And then I use my favorite preamp that I mentioned before, which is my Avalon 737. That's what I use for a room mic. And then I use a Neve 1073 for the slapback cabinet. So when I put down a guitar track, it's 4 tracks. It's 4 tracks of guitar is one take. And then I had the left and right from the fractal, which is kind of squeezed over on the one side. So basically setting up the panning structure so how I mixed it basically. So it's done in the box. So it's basically just drums, bass, and guitar. Bass was recorded direct, it was like a 59p bass, just plugged straight into one of my API pre's. And that's how we did that.
With just a mic on the bass amp, no direct. Oh no, just direct.
Yeah, just direct. So we played when we were rehearsing. We had with the guys that we played on this. We only played together like 6 times ever. And when we were doing our live rehearsals, he's playing through an SVT rig out in the room, and I was recording it. But when we put down the drums, I basically, I wanted to recut the bass after it was recorded. So even though we were playing live, he's playing through his SVT rig. Actually, he was using a basement head through an SVT 810 cab. And then the drummer's playing, like on a vintage Ludwig kit and, a Vistalite, one of those clear kits.
Oh, I love Vistalites. They're great.
Yeah, it was killer. And then he also had a DW kind of silver sparkle kit, which is on some of the tracks. So we got the best of both. So a DW kit and the vintage Vistalite Ludwig kit on the tracks. But once those were cut, and then I was playing live, through my rig with gobos, and we were all playing, all 3 of us in the room. Here we go. And then basically, then once I started, looking at the takes and what was what, and I started, getting the parts more solidified. The bass player came back, and he would work on his parts. He came back and then recut direct.
So the bass and guitar weren't bleeding onto the drum tracks themselves.
Not enough to ruin it. That's the thing. I got enough separation. That's the cool thing about that room, that space that I had, is that there was these diffusers in the room. There were 7 of them, and they go from floor to ceiling. And if any of the rock stars want to go to winslowctaudio.com, and then there's a studio section, you can see photos of that room.
Yeah.
And you can see these black giant pillars that kind of like are these half circles that come out of the wall. Those were basically these diffusers that would create these reflections where you ended up with all these safe pockets. So with very minimal baffling, you could get away with no bleed. So if you were to solo the drum tracks, you would hear in the distance bleed, no doubt about it. But it's so muffled and it's so it just didn't affect it.
It wasn't invasive sound.
It wasn't invasive. Exactly.
It wasn't going to compete for the attention of the actual instrument. And what I find is that bleed can be a really, really wonderful sound that we have to discover, because you can get a really wonderful, like, thickening, doubling sound on stuff, a little bit of a chorusing. Just, as long as somebody's not playing the wrong notes at all, entirely. But I remember one of the first places I discovered that was listening to a Rolling Stones record, and you get to this one section and you hear like a ghosting of the double on the vocal, I think it was. And then I've had that happen on some of my own sessions too. And you can almost get like cool pre-delays on a lyric if you hear the scratch vocal, in the room just before it gets sung. And so it can be a great effect. Now, with the mix, once you got this stuff re-recorded, so obviously part of the message from you is get a really great capture of the sound so that when you're going to mix it, you've got something great to work with. And your big guitar sound, what makes sense about that to me is if you're going to do a trio thing and you get one guitar going down. Maybe you did overdubs or not. I don't know. But I'm assuming the main guitar is a big, big part of each song. You really need to make sure that it's handling the stereo spectrum so that it feels full and complete and doesn't feel like everything's just mono and panned up the middle necessarily.
Yeah, definitely the guitar takes up the space for sure. It's a guitar record without it being a guitar record, so to speak. And what I mean by that is like typically if you're thinking of an instrumental, guitar record, one might think, say, somebody like a Steve Vai or a Joe Satriani or somebody where it's it's just this featured kind of thing, and that's not really what I do. It's not about that. It's like, although, like, I don't even like to think of it as a guitar record per se, because I'm not playing it for the guitar players, so to speak. I think I am in the sense of like vibe or texture or tone or something like that, but not so much in what the music is delivering. I'm trying to deliver what anybody on a Saturday afternoon wants to crank up while they're at the beach or in the backyard or wherever,
Right. The feel and the
exactly.
And the mood. Now, what about the mixing aspect of it? I mean, what are some favorite stuff that you would have done in the box, or how would you break it out of to the analog world again as part of your mix?
Okay, so basically, and let me just throw this in because you said this with the bleed. The bleed on, imagine this. I rewrote the music entirely. So like you're saying, like how the bleed can really add a flavor or something. In how it worked out for me is it's kind of a haunting oddity because I rewrote the songs.
Wow, so it's totally different.
Yeah,
melodies and rhythms and everything.
Exactly. Then what went down? It's like, because I knew it's like this is not going to be it. And then so the guys were like hearing songs they never heard before. In some case, I just completely rewrote all my parts to something totally different, and now it's a whole new thing. And so that bleed in some places, like on a room mic, I'd have to put on a high pass or something and cut it out at certain frequencies where it lived, but it ended up being usable in this kind of unique, haunting kind of way. So I just wanted to add that. In terms of the mixing aspect, the drums, they're basically, taking up the stereo field and living in their own space. The bass is kind of right up the center, in its own space, nice and separated from the kick as best I could. But there is a gluing going on. There is there's kind of a looseness to all of this, and that kind of goes with that not trying to fix it to death kind of a thing. So it's a very raw energy type deal. But in terms of the mixing, like leaving the box or whatnot, I basically, my preamps are also set up in the line situation so I can pull them up as inserts, instead of plugins. I can use my actual preamps and whatnot. So, I can reuse if there's any compression or EQing or anything that I'd like to do. So one thing that I did do is with my Shadow Hills mastering compressor and this overstayer unit that I use, which is kind of like a harmonic, I call it like a harmonic saturating type device.
Jeff Terzo.
Yeah. And these are items, those two items I got from Dweezil. So see, Dweezil is also a huge supporter of what I do. And so he was giving me things to use along the way. And ultimately I ended up buying all this stuff from him because I was using it all the time. He's like, you can't live without that now. I don't want to take it from you. So, these sorts of things, I ended up, buying straight from him. And, so what I would do is I would run my guitar through these varying items and then, fatten them up, get the sound tone that I like, and then print that. So I would print the track, reprint it after it's recorded, run it through some of that stuff, print it, and then those are the tracks that I ended up mixing. So I just run the guitar rig, like I could do 2 channels at a time. So the first thing I would do is I'd print the first 2, mics A and B through the Shadow Hills. Okay. Do it again. Now Mike's C and D, print it to Shadow Hills. Now I got 4 tracks printed, with whatever device. And then also too, that unit, you have this really cool transformer setup. So, and that transformer setup, you can really change the character of the track. And so whether you want it to sound more like it's going through this console or that console. So it was, things like that I did to try and spiff up my basic tracks of, printing it through some things and now print, because usually when I track, I don't use compression and things like that. And if I do, it's very minimal, but typically I don't. So it was cool to be able to, just play with those things and see what else can I do with this, and get a different kind of, how can I escalate my sound even more?
Very cool. Very cool.
So that's what I would do, is print it and then, hit it and then mix it after the fact then.
Right on, man. Right on. There's a lot of junk that needs to get cleaned up in a podcast or music mix. Boomy pops on the microphones, piercing sibilants, background noise, harshness, distortion, wild dynamics, and EQ correction. And all this editing and mixing cleanup would be impossibly time-consuming were it not for the magic of iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron. iZotope gives you a collection of plugins for mixing in your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with set it and forget it simplicity. Check out the new Repair Assistant plugin to help you find the perfect mix prep settings for any instrument. And the standalone RX app includes new features like text transcription and multiple speaker recognition for easy editing and navigation. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. The OWC Envoy Pro Electron is your super fast and rugged pocket-sized portable USB-C SSD that keeps your music safe in the studio or on the stage. With storage of up to 2 terabytes and speeds of up to more than 1 gigabyte per second, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crush-proof, so there's no need to worry about your music anymore. Find the new Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars and use the custom link below in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Craig Parker Adams, joining us from his studio in Los Angeles. And we're talking about recording his record, putting it out, getting amazing guitar tones, beating Eddie Van Halen, all kinds of cool things. But in the second half, let's jump in and we'll start digging into mixing Frank Zappa's live recordings and other records. Very, very cool stuff. Craig, you ready to jam, dude?
Yeah, let's jam.
All right. So you recently had an incredible write-up for a project. I mean, when this comes out, it'll have been out for a minute, but you have had the great fortune to mix many of Frank Zappa's projects and live recordings. And then you guys had a cool thing where you did an 8 CD box set of 1971 Fillmore East recordings. Tell us about that project.
That project, what's crazy is when we first had our first interview, that I was working on that project, but I couldn't talk about it at the time because of the non-disclosure things that I have to do when I work for them. But that was great because, of course, at this point, when I was doing that, I was, I had 11 years of Frank projects behind me. But what was so special to me about that one was the addition of John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
Yeah, right.
that was just like, wow, because I've done so many awesome Frank projects over the years, and I was just always excited to do it. It's just like, so whenever they ask me or reach out and then they tell me what it is, it's always like, wow, yeah, cool. But, I just, I didn't see that coming. And as somebody, as a studio rock star, you thrive anytime you get a chance to, work with or work on anybody, any kind of artist of that level or uniqueness. And so I was super excited to be able to solo his vocal or her vocal and
Yeah.
just, and that was really a joy, because I'll tell you, I've been able to have that experience a few times in my life where you hear like what I would call just a pinnacle apex artist on, soloed, their track soloed. And the experience I had with John was a similar experience I kind of had when I got to do a Hendrix work on a Jimi Hendrix thing back in the early 2000s. And that is, it was almost not special in a sense, where it was just like, it's just a guy.
Right.
It's just a guy, and that's his voice. There's nothing special other than the fact that he's part of our DNA. He's part of our societal makeup. It's like you grew up with him, so that's what's so special about it. But in terms of him himself, he's just a guy, and just a regular guy on a mic. But it just so happens we know that voice.
Right.
So
Right.
well.
Yeah, it's always striking. You think that there's a special secret to the way that voice is recorded until you record a voice like that and you realize, oh, that's the sound that's coming out of that individual's head.
Exactly. And you know what else is that he's using, one of the guys, like one of Frank's spare guitars or something, playing through some Fender that's on stage, because Frank's really the only guitar player throughout the whole, series of shows. I ended up mixing all 4 of those concerts in their entirety. And, John comes on, they plug him into an amp. We end up losing a drum track so it can have John's guitar. And right away when John starts playing, and he's only playing at the beginning of the encore on the first tune, basically, but his guitar sounds exactly like it does on Revolution.
Wow.
And it's just like, that's the same sound. It's like, it's not different in any way. So you really are getting the purity of that guy. That's just him. So I loved being able to bathe in that and just, like really soak up that aspect of it just is what it is. There was nothing else besides it. He played the guitar. It sounds like so I love that. But anyways, the project. Go ahead.
Well, so just for a little context, the Fillmore East, I'm just on Wikipedia here, right? So the Fillmore East was rock promoter Bill Graham's rock venue on 2nd Ave, East 6th Street, Lower East Side neighborhood of New York in Manhattan. And I guess it was open from 68 to 71. So this was the last year that the Fillmore East was open?
That's correct. Yeah,
Wow.
This is one of the last gigs that was done there. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and then there was a Fillmore West too, right in San Francisco. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, super cool stuff.
And then what about the way that this stuff was recorded? Do you know anything about the recording truck? Was that the record plant truck or something like that?
I don't know what. I know that
maybe Frank had his own truck at that point.
I don't think he had his truck at that point. That came a little later in the 70s, but, he would, obviously everything was recorded, but I don't know which truck was used for it. I know the engineer was Barry Keane. That's the original recording engineer of that. It was recorded on 16 track, I think, to recall. And it was basically, the drums were left and right with a kick track, and then, a bass track. And then, so lots of things are doubled up in places, except Frank's guitar is usually on its own. Actually, back around that time, his guitar sometimes would share. I don't have a track listing in front of me. I should, you know what? While I'm talking to you, let me see if I can get one up.
Did you have to do the transfers yourself, or were they already done when you got them?
No, it's already done. In fact, I should mention Joe Travers, if anybody knows that name. His official title for the Zappas is the Vaultmeister, and he used to play drums in Dweezil's band Z, and also he was the original drummer in the Zappa Plays Zappa. So he's been a part of the Zappa world for since the early '90s, and I've known him the whole time. And so Joe really is the guy that does everything.
Very
So
cool.
so it's Joe. He's just doing it all, and so what he does is he does all the transfers. So the family owns all of the varying formats that they could ever need. And in fact, when I used to work up at the UMRK, there's a small room behind the control room, and they had all of the different formats for whatever machine they would need there, because they had underground vaults. So Frank's masters did not leave the property. So anytime they needed something, they'd go down into the vault, get whatever they needed, bring it up, put it on whatever machine they needed to put it on, and then transfer it to whatever format. So it's all done in-house. And Joe is the guy who coordinates and handles all of that.
Wow.
So he brings me 96K masters and WAV files, 96K. And so he does the transfers off of the tape. And basically my role is I'm mixing historic performances. So my role isn't really to change them and to modernize them and to put them into something other than what they originally were.
No drum triggers?
Yeah, no, nope. What's funny though is as I did the gig that the project I did right before this Mother 71 was actually Frank's last U.S. performance ever, 1988. And there were triggers, Chad Wackerman on drums, triggers, and also Frank's synclavier was brought on tour for that year. So that was, mixing, just think about that, mixing 48 tracks from 1988, his biggest band, like a 12-piece band or whatever.
Yeah.
And then also having the synclavier involved, and then there were triggers on that drum set as well as regular mics, overheads, and things. And then going from that project to now 1971, Ainsley Dunbar, 3 tracks. It's just wild the variety that that you would get working on Frank projects over the years.
So it was a 48 track recording from 88. Was that 2 reels of analog tape? Is that how it was recorded initially, or were we going into 48 track digital or something like that?
48 track digital. So now I know that now on the road, they might have had 2 24-inch machines. And you know what? I don't think they would have. It probably was recorded on a 48 track, because Frank had a 48 track digital recorder at the UMRK when I first went there in 1989. Okay.
Wow. Do you remember what brand it was?
I think it was Sony.
Interesting. Wow. Fascinating. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I remember seeing that machine just right outside the door. It had a place where it lived right by the stairs. And so I remember that clearly, as well as at that time, that's when he was always, sitting in the corner on the synclavier. I do have the track layout for the 71. I found it. So I'll let you know what that is. But anyways, because when he recorded live, there was always an A machine and a B machine. So it wouldn't be likely that he would have 4 24 tracks. Do you know what I'm saying? Because
right.
You'd have, that just wouldn't be practical. So it probably was recorded on a 48 track that was on the road with them at that time.
Yeah, the power of the internet here. So the 24 track PCM 3324 was released in 82. And the later 48 track PCM 3348 was released in 89. So there you go.
Yep. But this tour was done in 88, and it's likely that Frank would have had maybe a prototype or,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so the track layout for the Fillmore East is tracks 1 and 2 were the drums left and right. and track 3 was the kick drum. 4 was the bass guitar. Track 5 was Howard Kalin's vocal. Track 6 was Mark Volman's vocal. Track 7 was Frank and Jim Pond's vocal. Track 8 was Bob Harris's vocal. Track 9 is Frank's guitar DI with his amp effects on the left, as well as track 10 is Frank's guitar amp with effects on the right. Track 11 was a Wurlitzer. Track 12 was Ian Underwood's woodwinds and keys. 13 was Ian's keys, additional keys. 14 is Frank's guitar, as well as, so just Frank's guitar and Don Preston's Moog. And 15 and 16 were the audience.
And so they were not traveling with the marimba and on that stuff?
Not on that one. Nope. So that would have been Ian. Ian would have been covering it on keys in one way or another, or woodwind. So yeah, no Ruth on that one. Yeah.
Ian's like, I got 2 hands. Try a little Spinal Tap reference for you there, rock stars.
Yeah. But incredible stuff. And then also too, Howard and Mark from the Turtles, the 71 show, there's so much beautiful, they're just at the apex of their stage, antics in terms of their play.
Yeah.
It's such the shows were so fun to do because they're just because of that interplay. There was a lot of really funny interplay going on between those guys. And so, it's just really entertaining. And then you had, some of the earliest versions of this track called Billy the Mountain, which for the Zappa fans who know, that's a 30-minute song.
Wow.
And it's a journey, it's a ride. And I've had so much experience mixing that song when I did, Dweezil Zappa Play Zappa shows. I mixed that song, Billy the Mountain. So this is a 30-minute tune basically. And those were all recorded on 48 track. I mixed that song 19 times, 19 different versions. Back in 2010 and 11, and so it's at this point now that to do the original versions, it's like I don't want to say it's a cakewalk, but it's
you knew the song, you knew what to expect.
The song,
yeah, coming. Right.
And then to hear its original origins and where everything came from, it's a delight. It's very enriching.
Now, have you found yourself? I know you're a big, as a player, you're a big fan of Eddie. Had you also become a fan of Frank's playing, and had you, tried to figure out how to get some of those sounds and tones or play? I know Frank always was self-described as a super fan of the pentatonic scale. He's just like, I'm a lover of the pentatonic scale, and the guitar is my composition instrument.
Well, my 2 favorite guitar players organically were Ed and Frank. So I've loved Frank since the late 70s when I first got turned on to him, and shut up and play your guitar and all that. Like, for some reason, his unique way of playing guitar, it spoke to me. It didn't turn me off. Like, some people get shut down by it. Some people are just totally enamored by it.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
That's me. I was totally enamored by it. And, there was just so many different variations of the way that he played. But of course, once I started working on his music, it just, the understanding became much deeper. But what's crazy is anytime I work on something of Frank's that I used to listen to on the bedroom floor is what really gets me off, because it's like it takes me back to being a kid listening to my brother's records, and now I'm working on the actual piece that I used to listen to 40 odd years ago on the floor as a kid. Now I'm mixing it. And, and so what I do is when I mix his guitar solos, and I think this is one of the reasons why they like using me, is because I'm also a guitar player, but I try to I know when it's right is when I'm reliving old moments, in other words. So
Yeah.
when I'm writing his guitar solos, see, one thing I learned from Dweezil about mixing his father's music, or the way that Dweezil likes to do things, and Dweezil learned from his dad, is that he's not really static. He doesn't really put something at level and leave it. He rides
Nice.
it. It's always being ridden. So if you were to look at all of the automation marks on a guitar solo or whatever, a song or whatever, you'd just be like, "Are you kidding?" Now Dweezil likes to he'll ride automation, riding the fader and feel it that way. I write it in. I like to ride it and write it.
Hmm.
So anyways, that's what it's not just like set at this level and there it goes. No, it's being written, and it's super, detailed and complex, but it's always bounced off of, does this take me back to the bedroom floor, basically, or back to when I saw him live or something like that. That's how I gauge it. And then of course everything that I do gets approved through Joe. So, Joe brings me the stuff, Joe signs off on the stuff. So it's all Joe.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joe. Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mix Master Bundle to get great mixes using simple free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. Every studio needs a good vintage mic for that classic warm sound. Whether you're looking for those airy highs, sweet mid-range, or silky low-end, a good vintage mic can put the magic in your mixes. So it's no wonder vintage mics have been loved and praised by thousands of engineers for decades. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia using only the best electronic components and feature the patented Golden Drop capsule design for great detail and richness of tone that will bring that classic vintage vibe to your studio and be a real workhorse for your sessions. This time, our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer only available to you, Rockstars. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the Vintage Series mics V67, V47, and V12, the mic you're hearing right now, at jzmic.com. Well, one of the things that strikes me immediately is like the playing is just awesome on this new stuff. Now, of course, when I'm hearing this, the full album or the full 8 CD set hasn't even been released. So I'm hearing some of the teaser clips in there. But the, Frank's guitar playing just sounds awesome. And he really sounds like he's at a height of his game as a guitarist, and playing the solos, and the energy is just spot on. And it's got that thing that's this wonderful combination of the right kinds of effects and the expression of the wah and the tone and like this combination of thickness and thinness of the guitar tone that really is inviting tonally, like makes you want to lean into the sound instead of being pushed back by the tone.
Right.
I certainly have experience creating and recording guitar tones that'll push you right out of your seat and out the control room door. So it's an impressive thing to be able to get that right and just draw you in. But also like the picking, there's something going on with the way Frank would pick where like, there's like, I'm picking up on 4 favorite notes and about 20 in between notes that I'm not sure what just happened. But it's like an exciting rhythmic thing going on.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like in a lot of ways I'm I've done enough where it's like I should be some sort of authority on what it is that he's doing, and it's just like it's still bewildering. And I don't think I shared this with you last time, but there was a time where Frank sat down. Like I sat with Frank while he played guitar, and Dweezil and I. So Dweezil and I
Wow.
Dweezil and I we used to be out in the tracking room at the UMRK, like jamming guitar or whatever. And Frank would be in the control room on the other side of the glass, in the corner with his back to us, working at the synclavier. So all the time, we just be jamming, and here's my friend's dad. There he is. Well, one time he came out and he sat down with us and he picked up a guitar. And this is when he wasn't really playing guitar anymore, which would have been around 89, 90, 91, somewhere in
Like
that time frame.
Jazz from Hell era.
At that point, he was just all into the synclavier, and he had really kind of put down the guitar basically.
Yeah.
So it was basically done. So I met him on Memorial. No, what is it? What's September 1st? That holiday? Is it Labor Day?
Oh yeah, about whatever it is.
Yeah,
Labor
so that
Day,
whatever
yeah.
that September 1st, 1989.
The date after which you're not allowed to wear white. That's all I can remember.
Yeah, so that's when I met him, and so at that point he was done touring basically. Although I did go to see his rehearsal. I saw him with the Ensemble Moderne, and some other things that he was doing at that time. But he was basically he had done touring, and he was wrapped up in the synclavier. He gave me a copy of the Yellow Shark, on cassette. He played for me the Yellow Shark, a bunch of variations when he was showing me the synclavier, where he had his guitars sampled into the synclavier.
Wow.
And he'd show me like, here's my Les Paul from the cover of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. Now you're hearing it play this, what a G-spot tornado or some crazy thing from the record, some passage or whatever. And then he'd switch it to one of his other guitars, an SG or something. And now here's that same thing with this guitar.
Wow.
So it was incredible. And I remember I asked him a question. I'm like, what about a slide guitar? And he just looked at me kind of strange, and he's like, now think about that. You'd have to sample how many different kinds of slide maneuvers would you have to sample? Otherwise, every note would be wait. It's like, so he just basically made me feel stupid for asking him that question. Like, yeah, that's not practical, kind of a thing or whatever. But anyways, so one day Dweezil and I were playing, and Frank came out and he sat down right next to us. So the three of us are kind of like in this little circle. And I remember Dweezil too, because that's what I was struck by was how he too was in awe of when his dad would sit down and play. And I just remember looking at Frank from literally 2 feet away playing, going, what in the hell? Like, it didn't make sense, even though, yeah, the guy's playing the guitar, but it didn't make sense. It's like the way he held the pick, the way he would attack the string from above, up near the end of the fretboard, and his right hand being so bent in like in a classical form, but even more so with the arch. It was so unusual. And then what he was playing just didn't make sense.
Wow.
It was a crazy experience, and it was very special. But in terms of, like what you're saying on this particular record, every project that I do, I know is going to yield some sort of uniqueness to how he was playing at that time, even though he always had that really crazy approach that Dweezil calls the chicken and the spider, I think. is how he refers to that. Like the picking hand is like a chicken plucking at things, and then the spider is the strange way that he arches his fretting hand. But the way his melodies and the lines that he uses, it's like, yeah, it always perplexes me, but I love it. I love getting lost in his guitar solos,
Yeah. It's a trip to hear about him just, putting the guitar down to program his synclavier, because it was only a few years after that I went to recording school, and I took a MIDI class back when, we had a MIDI lab in the school, and, with one of those old Macintosh SE computers, and I guess it was, I don't know, a couple of different keyboards, and the first iteration of a Performer. I was programming and stuff, and I was like, well, what am I going to program? So I was like, oh, I've got the real book. I'm going to just enter all these notes for Peaches and Regalia and program that out. And it was just such a trip. And it turned out cool. I lost the copy, God. And I don't know what I did about the guitar solo. I think I faked something is probably what I did. Or maybe I programmed the guitar solo, because if the notes were there, I put in some kind of instrument for that. But that's awesome stuff. And I was always struck by and a little bit jealous of the fact that Frank, self-taught himself how to read music, as I recall. Maybe that's not 100% accurate about the self-taught, but that was my impression. And he would talk about being able to be on a plane and fly somewhere and just imagine the music in his head and write it all down and compose that way. And that still strikes me as an awesome way to be able to create,
Well, check this out. You're right about that. But in working on the varying box sets and things that I've done, which at this point, I think there's probably over 50 records of his that I've done, or 50 CDs worth of music of his that I've done, put it that way. When you hear him in the studio communicating with the musicians, and most of these musicians are from the best schools or whatever, right? So these people, or even, I also noticed this when I mixed his orchestral record. So this is Frank with a 37-piece orchestra, okay? So 1975. When he talks to the musicians, he knows more than they do. And he knows the terminology more than they do. And so to be self-taught at that level and to use the technical terminology that goes with it, with classical musicians and whatnot, that is what kills me. It's just like he was the real deal through and through. So let alone like how does he even do it? It's just like he was such a light years ahead, just an advanced being, and how he understood and saw things, the way he wrote. But when he communicated with the artists, part of it was like what you need to do is like being a studio rock star, where you kind of need to know how to finesse the person you're dealing with. You have to kind of think ahead and speak in terms where you know that they're going to comprehend what you're saying because you're trying to achieve something.
Yeah.
Like he totally had that. But then also too, he like the type of stuff that he knew was the legit stuff. Like if you're going to talk about the sonics of a room, he'll talk to you from the level of the engineer that would design the room. Like he knew that level. Like I remember there was a book that was sitting next to his chair in the studio. It was written, I think, the same year he was born, which was, I think, 1941, 40 or 41. And it was from Baltimore, Maryland, this book. And it was on, which is where he was born, and it was on acoustics. And so everything he took on himself was really at the level of like the pinnacle of that science, like the science behind the acoustics. That's what he knew. That's why when I work on his projects, they're not asking me to alter what was there. They're asking me to bring out what was there to the best of my ability without screwing up what was originally there, because he had the best engineers on the job. He had the state-of-the-art equipment that was available at the time. That's just how he did what he did, you know? And so, yeah.
That's fascinating, man. That's wild stuff. I'd forgotten, or didn't realize or had forgotten that he had started out on the East Coast in Baltimore before ending up in California. But talk a little bit about that. So here you are mixing an 8 CD set from the Fillmore East. And what were some of the tools that you found useful, whether it's plugins in the box or whether you were running anything out through your analog gear to enhance without accidentally removing some of what the original? It's like restoring an old painting. You want to clean it up, but you don't want to accidentally remove some of the paint from the masterpiece, from the original.
Exactly. Well, first let me point out that I think out of those 8 CDs, I think 5 or 6 of them is what I did, and then Eddie Kramer did the others.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. That's a trip.
Yeah. So they brought in Eddie Kramer because they were going to do a series. Now, Eddie, what they would bring him in to decorate, like, do what you do, Eddie, like do your thing to it. What I'm doing is basically, I mean, I do my thing to it, but it's basically keeping it as it is as best as possible. Yeah. So to get to your question, it's really kind of, there was no restoration on this project that I can recall other than some very minimal type stuff. And that would be, maybe some crackling on the organ or, the whirly or something like that I would try and get rid of. Or maybe there's some line noise or something on the bass or something.
Because it was something that was just too distracting. It was something that would take away from the music instead of being a honest part of what was happening.
Right. Because again, everything was always recorded so well. So, but if a technical issue comes up, it comes up. It can happen even to the best, and it did. So, but on this particular project, the resto was very minimal. So I really got to get just lost in the performances. So really, at that point, then it's boiling down to tonal type things and EQing basically. And on the last time we spoke to the rock stars, you had asked me about a favorite plugin of mine, and I very unceremoniously said that I love just the basic 7-band Pro Tools EQ, the default EQ. And the reason why I chose that plugin was because there's something about the proprietary nature of the way DigiDesign does what they do, and that their basic EQ to me sonically just works really well. So when I'm doing a project like this, where I'm just kind of carving sonics, that's my go-to tool. So I use that 7-band EQ, as unsexy as that sounds to the rock stars.
It's kind of sexy though, because when we hear stories like this, it gives us all the power. It's like, you got what you need. Go make the record that you dream up in your head.
Basically, yeah. So that is what it was, because everything is predominantly there. So you're basically, just smoothing and shaping and adding a little bit here and there. Nothing is drastic. It's minimal because, again, my client stresses the authenticity of what was there. That's really what is supposed to be exemplified. So, they want the listener to feel like they're actually there and that they're hearing what went down. So that's the shaping. Now, I think on the Moog and maybe on some of the horn solos, there was a little bit of AMS reverb added. So I have the AMS, the rack mount reverb unit, the analog reverb unit that we would know from the 70s and the 80s.
Right. So that feels like an appropriate matchup sonically too.
Yeah. And so that was brought in for a little bit of air on some of the spotlight sections of some of the solos. Now, not on the guitar solos, because, Frank is raging on stage. And, we do have the audience tracks. So I don't really have to add anything to what's there. And also, too, the way he used his effects, it's all given to you right there on the tape.
So the audience tracks, is that just a stereo pair?
It is.
That's everything for both the sound of the room and the audience applause in between if you need it?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So
but they probably set up more than 2 mics. They probably pre-mixed a bunch of stuff down to the stereo.
Yeah,
tracks,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, very much so. So I think the way that they had the stage set up and what was going on, everything was being, bust on down to, they're grouping many things. So the consoles were quite large. I had in my studio for years, actually, I gave this, you can see it on the Winslow Ct audio website. That lived in the lounge at the studio. I had a giant photo. It was like 8 feet long by maybe 4 feet high, black and white picture of Frank in his mobile truck from back. The photo was taken around 1980, but it was from the 70s. And I had that for almost 30 years. And I just recently gave it to Dweezil. So now he's putting it up in his new studio because Dweezil has his new studio up, which is incredible.
That's an awesome photo, man. I'm looking at it right now, and he's in the truck, and there's a console behind him. He's leaning over another console, and then there's 2 more consoles that are stuck to the wall,
exactly,
vertically.
Yep. And if you also see behind him, there's a JBL 4311 from the ceiling attached to the ceiling. It's got the screen on it, but the grill, so you're not seeing the speaker because the grill face is on it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and that's the speakers that the family gave me.
So I have to share a little. I have to share another anecdote too about seeing a poster of Frank on the wall. When I was backpacking in '91, and I found myself in Prague. They had just the wall had come down, and all of a sudden Prague, in Czechoslovakia at the time, was open for the first time. So we went over there in backpacks and showed up in the train station, and like right where you arrived, and I guess we bought our ticket or something like that. Maybe it was on the way out or on the way in. But I turned around and what's up on the wall is just a poster of Frank Zappa right there. Because I remember the president of
Havel.
Havel was apparently a big Zappa fan.
He sure was.
Which is a cool thing to discover.
Yep.
So I knew I was in the right place.
Yep, that's where you want to be. There's Frank.
Yeah, exactly. Adam Audio introduces the new A7V monitor for home and pro studios, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. The all-new A-series line of monitors delivers the same highly accurate, transparent sound and unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design that has made Adam Audio famous for over a decade, but now introduces new innovations such as the rotatable high-frequency propagation system waveguide, allowing the XART tweeter to disperse sound with controlled consistency, and DSP-based room correction and speaker voicings. Using the A-Control software or SonarWorks and a measurement mic, you can now integrate advanced filters directly onto the DSP on board the speaker to help compensate for imperfect room acoustics without introducing annoying latency or requiring plugins. This allows you to tune your monitors for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want to meet your ever-evolving studio needs. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at adamaudio.com. For 15 years, I recorded hundreds of bands like Jack White, Adele, and the Black Keys in my hay bale studio at the Bonnaroo Festival. I had to work fast and deliver finished mixes to the radio DJs within an hour, so I chose to use the solid-state Logic AWS 948 Plus for my mixing console. There's just no substitute for mixing on a real console. Until now, that is. SSL brings you the UF8 and UC1 controllers so that you can recreate the feel and speed of mixing on a console with the flexibility of mixing on your computer in your home studio. Paired with the SSL Channel Strip 2 and 4000B plugins, you can now get a world-class sound using real faders and real knobs to mix as fast as your ears will guide you. Levels, panning, EQ, and compression, they're all built right into the controllers. So go put the feeling back into your mixes at solidstatelogic.com. All right, well, very cool. So when you were mixing it and you had those audience mics there, just to give the rock stars something to think about in case they find themselves doing a live recording of their own and they're like, we want to make sure we have enough of the right stuff. What were the elements that you felt like you heard in that sound that added to the mix? If you were going to advise somebody else, you're going to do a live stage recording, make sure you capture these bits because you'll be glad you did later when you mix it.
I think that there was a lot of body and a lot of life. There's actually a lot of energy going on there because, first of all, you have the space between the source and the mic, and then you have all of this energy between in that distance of all those people and how they're feeling, and somehow that gets in those mics. There's a lot of life in the audience tracks. So that can turn you can shut off audience tracks and turn it into a studio record.
Right.
You know what I mean? You literally can. If it's recorded well, you can shut those off, and now it doesn't feel anything like it. Now it feels like a studio record.
Yeah, it's all close mics.
Well, but that's exactly. So the whole, that's how I would describe it. So it's like if you're doing a live record, you want those audience mics to be a part of it because that's what's giving you that live feel. Now, the band, of course, will have their feel because, here we're in the studio or here we're live. But if you really want to convey it to the next level to the listener, those mics need to be a part of it. And, because now, well, that's basically it. They do. And then at that point, you're dealing with leveling and sonics with the EQ, where is like, if let's say you got too much low end in those audience mics, well, you can't really have those cranking through the track without it maybe making things a bit muddy or a bit boomy or woofy or, whatever term you want to use. So you might have to carve the sonics differently where EQs are in automation, where while the track's playing, I'm doing whatever. I'm accentuating or taking away these frequencies when the band is full on playing. And then, then when it gets to the end of the tune or whatever, those EQs turn off, and then there's everything's breathing again in a certain way. So you have to do what you can do with the minimal tracks that you have, which means you have to carve and trick the ear.
Can you break that down a little bit for us in Pro Tools? So you would have the EQ on those tracks, and then would you just write in automation for one of those gain knobs kind of gaining down smoothly in and out? Or is it a little bit more like when the downbeat of something happens, you just pop the EQ bypass?
Either of those scenarios that you just painted could totally be feasible. So it just there's no be all to end all. It's a contoured situation, and that's where the detailing can really get done. So let's say you don't really want to detail the performance as much because it's you set your level, it's static, and it's like here's where it lives, and that's fine. Like I was talking to you before about how nothing is static.
Right.
Well, I should rephrase that. Basically, the drums are static, but not always, but predominantly. So I'm not writing levels up and down on the snare or something as I would during Frank's guitar solo. Okay.
Right.
So there are instruments that are set it and leave it type situations, but anything that's being featured in any way, you want it to breathe properly, or maybe properly is the wrong word. Let's just say if you want it to do more than what it actually is, you can do that by writing in basic volume rides. And where volume rides don't work, you can do the same sort of deal in a more detailed way with EQing. So in the same way you can do volume automations, you can do EQing automations. And you don't know if, oh, there's feedback that happened at this time. There's, something might have occurred differently, or maybe, there's a reason why you don't want this frequency to be as loud as it is at this time. So maybe if I dip it here on these tracks, it still has it's still conveying what you want. So you can do a lot of decorating, of movement, added sonic movement by the way you detail those audience tracks. And you could set it and leave it, or turn them off at the downbeat when the band kicks in. Now there's no audience, whatever. You can do that. I've done that. I've had to do records where they are live records and you've turned them into studio records. That's what Frank used to do. He recorded all of his live performances, and he would make studio records out of those live performances and then do overdubs on them. This box set, this 71 box set, this was released, and parts of it were released on other records, and there were overdubs, but Joe had me take all the overdubs off. So I had to go through and mute out overdubs on live tracks. So they'd make a decision to lose. Frank would go, okay, we're going to lose this part of the live track or whatever, and I'm going to overdub over it. And so there's been projects where that happens because they don't want me to include the overdubs in these historic performances. They want it to be what it originally was. So,
but that's a bummer, because then you're like, oh, I've got this track that sounded great, and then all of a sudden the track goes away. Yeah, you're like, oh crap, I can't use it.
Yeah, no, it definitely happens.
I've had that happen. I think rock stars were familiar with the time when one of the overheads on the drums goes out, and then you're like, crap, I'm going to have to use a mono overhead for the whole song,
Yep.
I do have a question for you. When you're talking about the process of, some things are kind of static, you might start there and then you do rides. Talk a little bit about that, because I know one of the things that can make our brains hurt, or make mine hurt, is that stage where I'm trying to get the static mix right, but then there are these things that go by that are wrong. And somehow it's like we have to train our brain to ignore the stuff that's not working yet, because we know we'll address it later. It's like that same part of my brain that allows me to own a car for 10 years where the passenger door never opens and is always broken, and somehow I just ignore it. You know what I
mean? Oh, that's funny. Well, let's see if I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's like if you're working on a bass track, right? You're working on you got your song going in front of you, right? And you're working on one of the elements within. You are good at what you do, and you've got to the point where you are like laser-like focused on what you're working on, right? And you're keeping everything else at bay. So that's a technique that you inadvertently will get to, because you'll need to do that because you'll be in all sorts of different situations where you're going to need to get something done while all this other stuff is going on. Whether you're in the session, and you got a bunch of people cutting live and something else happens and now you need to do that, but yet you need to keep your ear on the band because they're laying down a track, and you have to diversify and be multifaceted. So, basically, building a mix. I mean, I'll tell you this, when I work on these projects, for instance, I have to basically deliver them. Let's say I don't print a mix hotter than minus 2.3 dB. Okay.
Right.
So first of all, I will have my meters on and telling me that I don't want to see anything that's going to take me beyond 2.3. Right. So as I bring up the mix, and I, have the body of it going, basically try everything at unity and just see where your level's at, starting from there, and then go, okay, I'm going to have to bring this down or whatever. I know that the drums live here. That's where they're going to be. And then I'll start to bring everything in. And I basically, Frank is on top. The idea is, the band is slamming, but when Frank solos, Frank solos, like that's the voice of God, basically.
Right.
And same when he's speaking. Other than that, the musicianship, these people, are so rehearsed and are so good that, they know how to play together. And there's months of time spent. I mean, you have to think about that. Months of rehearsals typically where they're spending time on the sonics so that when they're playing, they've got that bass fit with that kick perfectly the way that they want. You know what I mean? It's like they've worked and worked on that. It's not just you show up and here's my bass sound and here's my guitar sound and here. No, they've balanced their tones together as a unit for a long period of time to bring you something that's harmonically sound.
Yeah.
And that's what Frank would specialize in. So the band sounds like a very balanced band. So every frequency is spoken for in one way or another. So they really make it a lot easier for you because that kind of detail was put down. So I don't know if I've drifted away from what you originally asked me.
I think that's it. So it's like this allows you to strike a balance where you're like, okay, this is what I'm listening to now is kind of a balance that represents what they were trying to put forward from the stage with all that careful sonic arrangement.
Unity.
Yeah. And then but then now it's clear to me that in this section, the fader is required to get this solo up to the right level or that kind of thing.
Basically, yeah. Like you pull it up at Unity, and Dweezil and I would always marvel. We talk about this all the time. One of the things we love when he talks about his dad's recordings, just put it at Unity, and there it is. And the panning structure is typically written on the box.
That's great.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like that's where you're starting from. You're starting from awesomeness. You know what I mean? It's like, and you just, it's like, wow, what do I need to do? But it actually, if you really look at what it is that I do, it's completely involved, and it's mostly involved in just that minimal way of with the very tight sonics of the EQing that you're trying to smooth out. I don't get involved in compression or limiting or anything like that with the stuff. It's pretty much all EQ. I'm not doing any kind of modulating effects or anything like that. There might be, rarely am I adding some additional reverb to something to get it to breathe in a certain way? Or if there's an instance where there's an insert or something, like for instance, if the tape runs out and they missed something, which is rare, but it did happen, Joe would have to get an insert from a different performance where the tapes didn't do that. And then I have to sonically match that performance and insert it in like it never happened. And then you're matching all these EQs. And at that point, now you're doing a different venue in a different hall somewhere else where so that stuff can get tricky. But I've done it several times and we pull it off, and
all right. I have a live on Recording Studio Rockstars request for those that make the decisions for such a thing. We want to know when the remix multi-tracks come out to all of us, and like some artists and projects do, where they say, "Here you go. Here's the multi-tracks. Go do a mix of this record yourselves." That would be a lot of fun to mix one of Frank's songs.
Hey, that's a great idea. I'll put it to them if they haven't even thought of that themselves. It's likely that they may have, because there was, this is one of the sad things. There's many of the sad things of the passing of my friend that we talked about last time, Jeff Emmerich, is that they were going to ask Jeff to mix one of Frank's shows, and they wanted to do a series, and I think they are, where they have, it's just huge, well-known engineers, and that's one of the reasons why they brought Eddie in, to put their hands to do what they do with some of Frank's archive. But what you just said about putting a track out for all to do, I think that's a great idea, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's not already on the docket or
just
something.
Be fun for all the super fans. I mean, if you've been in the studio world for a while, you've seen, whether they were approved of or not. You see, somebody shows up with some multi-tracks of some famous record, and it's always amazing to go check it out. But I will say, with most of the multi-tracks that I've ever seen come across my radar, they don't mix themselves in the same way that you're describing. So it would really be a lot of fun to pull up faders and do a balance and be like, wow, this really was, I really see how this was put together.
Yeah.
But, it's fun to dream, man. It's fun to dream.
Well, that one may come true. Like how dreams often do come true. That may be one that comes true. So I will. You have my word on that. I will pass that on.
Right on. Well, I'm saying hello right now to all the Zappas, and I appreciate all the music that's come to us from Frank and from all of you. I think I told this anecdote at the last time we spoke, but one of my first musical experiences for me was going shopping for a jam box at Leechmere's in Massachusetts with my brother, and we're going around doing what we used to call the eject test to find the fanciest cassette deck, the jam box that where you press the eject button, and if it came out nice and slow and had a little pneumatic release, we were like, it must be a good one, Yeah. And so we're listening to cassettes, and there was a cassette in one of them, and it was Apostrophe, and somebody had left it there. I guess it was a demo for the stereos, and I'd never heard it before. And gosh, I hate to say it, but I was so struck by it that I may have not got myself a stereo just yet, but I may have gotten myself a cassette that was in one of the stereos there. And I took it home and I just devoured it, and I listened to it for ages. And that's how I first learned about Frank.
Wow. Well, good. I think that's exactly what the person, whoever procured that, or got that cassette to begin with, that's what they would want it to do anyways. Do you know what I mean? It affected your life.
Yeah, it did. And of course, after that, then I went and bought the records.
Sure.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free. Well, awesome, dude. Well, so let's see what else. We're coming up on the end here, but what else would you like to share about the mix of this project and the process of finishing? Any other remarkable moments for you in that process of doing this particular CD collection?
I think so. I have to. I'm going to mention Yoko.
Yes, yeah.
I was. I really grew to appreciate what she actually did on these recordings. The first your first inclination is just like, what the, why the, all of that sort of. But I kind of got into it, and again, being able to solo her. But I don't know if I tried to make this possible for the listener to hear, is that when you solo the tracks, of course you can hear things that you can't hear when everything is in. And so Frank and John are like talking while the band's playing. It's full on, but you can, if you solo the mic, which I did. So I tried to get this stuff to stick out as much as possible, where they're talking about what they're going to do, and because they're basically having a conversation on stage, like, okay, hey, you do this next, you do this kind of stuff.
Right.
But what I really liked is the sincerity between John Lennon and Yoko Ono and how they viewed Frank. And I was really taken by that, and the kind things that they kind of say and the way that they kind of say it. So if you listen closely during the outro, of the show, I'll say just the very end and some of the things. If just try and listen closely to see if you can pick up any of the dialogue that's going on. So that was really kind of nice to hear how much, because that was a very impromptu thing for them to show up and go on stage. The band didn't even know. The band had no idea. So they were just like, so it came out of nowhere, and it was all decided on very, that afternoon or whatever, or late afternoon. And then it turned into this other thing where, they ended up releasing some stuff that they didn't really understand was actually a song of Frank's, and then they retitled it. So there was a little animosities that occurred between the camps after the fact. But nonetheless, the performance is super cool. Hearing John just being John, it's like, that was just really cool to hear him sit in with the band in the way that he did. But outside of that, I mean, the Mothers, Ainsley is just, everybody is crushing on these performances. They sound amazing. And Howard and Mark, the banter, this is like the best banter you're going to get between these guys with some of the songs and just the off the cuff stories and the Mud Shark and all of these other things. It's just performance upon performance at every level. And that's what I really loved about it, because this is kind of the tail end of the Turtles, Flo and Eddie being with the band. And it's an Apex performance at an Apex legendary venue on its last legs. And it's got everything, and like you said, Frank's solos they're on fire.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. Well, so now when you were mixing in John and Yoko, what were some of the things that helped you know what levels to do? Like, for example, Yoko was singing along with the recordings?
Yeah, she's basically doing her thing, chanting and scanting and all of her yakking. I'll say for
how did you feel confident that you were mixing that in at where it was intended to be?
Well, I think the first thing I did was I muted her. I just muted her track, and I mixed everything to where, because I knew at that point, obviously the feature is going to be John. It's like his voice, what he's doing. So because basically John becomes Frank. Frank is no longer on the mic, except when he either is, giving direction or something. So Frank steps off the mic, and then he just basically goes to guitar guy. So John is now the focal point. So John has to become the featured, what's going on. Everything he says needs to be enunciated and heard. Yoko is accompanying him. She's doing all the accenting and whatnot. So she's not so much doing her thing on top of John. So you could think of her as like somebody doing leads, somebody who's singing and then somebody's doing leads. And
like almost like you had a saxophone that was like dropping in some lines or phrases or something.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. But not just that, she's a soloist. So she too needs to be equally featured. So really it was just about that. It was just everybody at that point became supportive to, the people who were on stage. And you could tell, I mean, the audience goes crazy when they see them walk out.
That's great.
They're just, because nobody's expecting it. And Frank's just telling them all, relax, calm down, sit down. I love, that's one thing I'll mention about Frank, is that he was always concerned about the safety of the people in the audience. It mattered to him.
Yeah.
Their comfort mattered to him. And so, and this is like you mentioned before, when he got pushed off the stage.
Yeah, that was the next question I wanted to ask you about, because that's a big deal.
Yeah, that happened about, I think, 4 months after these performances. So, or 3 months. It wasn't very long after these performances that took place. So, but he was always concerned about the safety of the people, and I always loved that, So I always try to let people know, from my personal opinion, that this kind of stark kind of image or whatever, that he actually, to me, he was a patriot, and he was concerned, like, about people's safety and enjoyment. Like,
yeah,
he cared about his fans. That's my feeling anyways. That's how I take it.
Yeah, I like that you dropped Patriot in there too, because he absolutely was. He was out there defending all of our freedoms and rights to free speech. He was right there speaking to, at the Senate hearings with Tipper Gore and everything when they were putting stickers on records and trying to essentially censor the lyric that was being included in the music. So he's always been a strong advocate for, the creative and our right to be able to express ourselves. When this happened was when he was doing the performance where he was pushed off the edge of the stage. It's funny because when I read his autobiography, in my head, I remembered it as him describing I was just playing, and next thing you know, I must have stepped off the stage or something, and I woke up in the hospital. Was he still playing with Yoko and John up on stage? Because it mentions here that they were actually doing a cover of "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
No. So when that incident was in Germany, I believe.
Or no, wait, hold on. Let me see. I think I wrote it down. Was it at the? Was it in? Maybe. I mean, you must be right, but I thought I read something about the name of the club too. As if it was a British club for some reason, or the London's Rainbow Theatre is that's what it says in the Rolling Stone article.
Oh, well, no. So this is not when Frank got pushed off. So that happens months later at a different venue under different circumstances without John and Yoko. So this is the only time John and Yoko got with them, came on stage, did the encore. That's what this is. On the tour, a few months down the road, that's when some guy who was mad at Frank because his girlfriend was, it's like the girlfriend was giving Frank too much attention or whatever, and the boyfriend got mad and went up and pushed Frank off the stage, and Frank fell all the way down into the orchestra pit. It's like a 13. Yeah.
Was that one of the tracks that you mixed yourself?
No, and I haven't done anything with that in any way. So,
wow. I remember Frank describing his autobiography about waking up in the hospital, and after that, his voice had dropped an octave. That's what he described it.
Yep, that is true. So, and it's interesting to hear him because he really sounds. Him and Dweezil have very much the same kind of voice, especially before that accident, even more so.
Yeah.
But that was a different thing, happened later, and not a part of this box set. So
that's wild. Well, one last comment I'll make about Yoko. I know for myself, I might not be alone in this, but I've found myself trying to understand, her singing and how it goes together with the Beatles, or in this case with these things. And so, it's just I know that there was a lot of creative, trying to find new boundaries and creative expression going on. But one thing that really struck me later in my own career was I was recording down at the Bonnaroo Festival for a number of years. And one year they brought the John Lennon bus there. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this is something that I know. My understanding is that Yoko is absolutely core and key to this project happening. And it's just an amazing thing where they've taken a bus and they've outfitted it as a recording studio and a video production studio. And then they'll find, there'll be a bus driver, and maybe they'll find 4 young engineers who are just coming out of school, and they live on the bus for 8 months or something like that. And they just drive around going to all these schools and working with kids, particularly underprivileged kids. And they help the kids write a song, record it, and make a music video all together. And they do this every single day. They put out a whole song and a music video. And it's a very, very impressive thing. So
wow.
Want to give a shout out to Yoko and that whole project, because that's very cool to me.
Well, I know that the masters that I worked from they got them from her because Frank's were lost. So there was 2 sets of masters from these 71 performances, and one set went to John and Yoko, and they put out their own version of this back in the early 70s. And then Frank had his, but his got lost. So they actually reached out to Yoko for her copies of the masters, and that's what I
Wow.
That's what Joe brought to me.
Cool stuff. Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I guess we're coming up on the end here. So let me make sure I drop in this closing question, which I always do. We're going to take the hypothetical Wayback Studio machine, and you get to go back in time and find previous Craig, maybe before you mixed Frank's record, the 8 CD set, or the 4 or 5 CDs out of that. And you go back and give yourself one bit of advice. You say, look, here's the single most important thing that you need to know, Craig, to be a rock star of the studio yourself. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself?
Oh, man. That's actually, you asked me that last time, and it made sense. But really now I don't know how this will sit, but I would just say to savor what you're doing in the best way that you can. Like that's my answer. Savor every project that you do, because there's something in it. It came to you for a reason. You may not think so. You may not see it firsthand. You just don't know. But savor it, because there's something in it for some reason. That's why it's in your lap, basically. So just really, really take the time to enjoy what you're doing, because it ends up, you get a whole blur of these sorts of things. And the more you savor it, the more you'll be able to access it in the future and wring it out, all of the gems and things that were in it, even something that seems like, something simple. Try to savor it if you can. I would say that. And then I would also say, at the same time, now this is going to this is like almost the opposite of what I just said, is that try and know when not to take the energy of what you're working on. Like if each project you do comes infused with an energy, and you can take on that energy, or you can keep that energy at bay. If you can just have an awareness that what you're about to do, make a decision within yourself. Like, I'm going to allow some of the energy from what I'm about to do to come into me, and I'm going to absorb it. Or go, I am not going to take on any energy from what I'm about to do. Like, have the wherewithal, because it will come onto you like a sponge, and you will soak things up. And sometimes that can weigh you down.
Yeah.
So try and have a little bit of an awareness to that aspect, and just make a conscious decision to go, yeah, I'm going to soak this up for all it has, or no, I am not going to take any of the energy on from what I'm about to do.
That's great, man. I love that. And it reminds me of the difference in the studio between when a project comes in and you want to, really invest yourself emotionally and creatively into it. You're willing to put in the extra time, or you're willing to say, if you guys, those times as an independent where you might say, like, if this is pushing your budget, I just want you to know this particular project means something to me. So let me know how I can keep helping you make this the best it can be. Versus also times when you just need to say, I just need to be an engineer for hire, and I need to do my very best craftsmanship on this, but have clear boundaries that here's the day we worked. And if you can take it to the next place, that's absolutely fine with me. And, I wish the best for it, but you don't get pulled into the stuff that will make you, feel uncomfortable later.
Yep. Well said.
Yeah. And then another part of that reminds me of is not long ago, I did a listening party for a record that I just finished. And that to me is the part of the savoring too, is a remind us rock stars, take the things that we finish and do. And if it's somebody else's record too, it's a great excuse to say, you know what, why don't we invite people over to the studio and we'll do a special listening event to the record that you just finished. And boy, did it feel good. It felt so good to do that.
Yep. Celebrate the things you work on, and it affects other people. and wallow in that, and also instigate it too, and be amazed, because friendships, all sorts of things can come out of those experiences.
Yeah, you never know where your next record's coming from too.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Craig, thanks so much for being on the podcast with us again. Totally a blast to hang out with you. You got so many great stories, man. A lot of fun.
Oh, thanks, man. It's always my pleasure. I really enjoy it. Thanks for having an interest to even hear them. So
yeah, well, thank you for sharing all those stories. Let the rock stars know again, where would you like them to come check you out? Where should they go online? What if they want to reach out to you and make their next record with you?
CraigParkerAdams.com. That's my personal website. WinslowCtAudio.com. That's the studio website. You can go to either one and get to either one from either one. So that's the best place to reach me at. And other than that, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks for hanging. And Rockstars, thanks for listening. And Craig, we will see you around the studio.
Awesome. Thanks, Rockstars. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lidge.
Cheers, man.
Cheers, bro.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, JZ Microphones, Atom Audio, Solid State Logic, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription for access to many plugins. At jzmic.com, use the code ROCKSTAR for 40% off the V47, V67, and V12 microphones. That's what you're hearing my voice on right now. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio, and they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.